On March 8, 1997, 13-year-old Shanon Denise Capers was reported missing from Haynesville, Louisiana. She was last seen walking near woods close to the Mill Street apartments where she lived with her family. Shortly after she was reported missing, law enforcement began a standard missing person investigation, but initial inquiries produced no substantive leads on her whereabouts. Shanon was described as a young girl known within her community, but by all accounts, she had not given any indication that she planned to run away. The day she disappeared, she left home on foot and did not return. Family members became concerned when hours passed without her coming back, and they contacted local authorities to report her missing. Standard protocols were initiated, including entering her information into national police databases and notifying local media. During the early weeks and months of her disappearance, law enforcement canvassed the surrounding area, interviewed acquaintances, friends, and neighbors, and attempted to develop leads through the usual investigatory channels. Despite these efforts, no clear evidence or credible sightings were confirmed. For an extended period, the case grew cold as investigators lacked substantial information pointing to either her location or any suspect responsible for her disappearance. Over 2 years later, on May 5, 1999, the case saw a pivotal development. Law enforcement received an anonymous phone call informing them that Shanon's body was buried in a wooded area behind the apartment complex where she had last been seen. The caller provided specific location details indicating where the remains could be found, allowing investigators to focus their search. A second call followed 2 days later, insisting that the initial search was insufficient and that the body remained in the area. Acting on this information, law enforcement conducted an expanded search of the woods behind the Mill Street apartments. Investigators located skeletal remains in the specified area. Forensic evidence, including skeletal analysis and comparison to known physical characteristics and DNA from Shanon's family, confirmed that the remains belonged to Shanon Denise Capers. The wounds on the skeletal remains were consistent with trauma inflicted prior to death. In concert with the discovery of her clothing and personal effects identifiable by family members, the remains were positively identified as belonging to her. Once the body was found and identified through forensic methods, the investigation shifted from a missing person case to a homicide inquiry. Authorities began examining potential suspects with links to Shanon's life. The focus of law enforcement soon turned to a local acquaintance, a man named Maurice Tate, who had been associated with Shanon prior to her disappearance. Evidence indicated that on March 8, 1997, the day Shanon disappeared, Tate had arranged to meet her in the wooded area where her body was later found. Testimony during later trial proceedings showed that he had asked an acquaintance to tell Shanon to meet him at that location. Key testimony also emerged from individuals connected to Tate. One witness, who had been associated with him at the time of the incident, testified that Tate explicitly stated his intent to harm Shanon. She reported that Tate said he planned to kill her. Additional testimony from another witness indicated that Tate acknowledged to her that he had hit Shanon in the head, though not all accounts were consistent. Forensic analysis of the skeletal remains further reinforced the evidence brought forward by witnesses. A bullet was recovered in proximity to the remains, and examination showed trauma consistent with blunt force injury and gunshot to the skull. These findings aligned with witness testimony suggesting fatal injuries prior to death. In June 2003, the case proceeded to trial in Claiborne Parish, Louisiana. The prosecution charged Maurice Tate with second-degree murder for the killing of Shanon Denise Capers. The evidence presented included the testimony of those who knew both the victim and the defendant, physical and forensic evidence recovered from the remains, and details of the anonymous tips that led to the body's discovery. The jury deliberated based on the evidence presented during the trial. After reviewing the forensic findings and witness testimony, the jury found Tate guilty of second-degree murder. In July 2003, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. The conviction ended years of uncertainty regarding who was responsible for Shanon's death. Following the conviction, Tate began serving his life sentence in a Louisiana correctional facility. The legal proceedings focused strictly on factual evidence linking him to the crime, and the sentencing reflected the severity of the offense as determined by the court. Shannon's family, after more than 2 years without knowledge of her fate, finally obtained confirmation of her death through the discovery of her remains and the subsequent conviction of her killer. The resolution brought some measure of closure to her loved ones after years of unanswered questions. Despite the conviction, this case remains a stark reminder of the challenges in missing person investigations when initial leads are sparse and substantive evidence is lacking. For an extended period after her disappearance, investigators lacked the information necessary to guide their search. It was not until the anonymous calls that investigators were able to recover Shannon's remains and pursue a legal case that led to a conviction. The Cold Case Files television series and other true crime programs have featured Shannon's case, noting the role that the anonymous tip played in eventually solving the mystery of her disappearance and turning it into a homicide prosecution. These portrayals focus on the procedural developments that unfolded over several years as law enforcement worked to establish both cause and culpability. Shanon Denise Capers was 13 years old at the time of her disappearance. Her case lasted more than 2 years with no resolution until a significant break came from an anonymous source. Her body was found buried near her last known location, and a local acquaintance was eventually convicted of her murder. The conviction brought legal closure to a case that had gone cold, though the tragic loss of life remains a somber point in Claiborne Parish's history. Michelle Martinko was an 18-year-old high school student from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. On the evening of December 19, 1979, she attended a choir banquet for the Kennedy Concert Choir at the Sheridan Inn in Cedar Rapids. After the banquet, she wore a black jersey dress, black scarf, black pantyhose and heels, a white and brown rabbit fur jacket, and carried a brown leather purse. She left the event intending to buy a new winter coat that she had placed on layaway at the newly opened Westdale Mall. After the banquet, she asked a friend to accompany her to the mall. The friend declined. She asked another acquaintance, who initially agreed but later changed their mind. As a result, Martinko went to the mall alone with about $180 in cash. Once at the mall, she visited several stores and spoke with friends and coworkers who also worked there. She was last seen at approximately 9 p.m. outside a jewelry store in the mall. When Martinko did not return home that night, her parents became concerned. Her father reported her missing to police at about 2 a.m. on December 20, 1979. Officers began searching for her. At around 4 a.m., an officer discovered her car, a tan and green 1972 Buick Electra, parked in the northeast corner of the Westdale Mall parking lot. Inside the vehicle, Martinko's body was found in the passenger footwell. She had suffered multiple wounds, including 29 stab wounds to her face, neck, and chest, and deep defensive wounds to her hands and forearms, indicating she had fought back against her attacker. The initial crime scene investigation determined there were no signs of robbery or sexual assault. Martinko's purse, cash, and personal effects were still with her, and nothing appeared to have been taken. No fingerprints were recovered from the car's interior or doors, leading investigators to conclude the assailant may have worn gloves. There was also no blood outside the vehicle, suggesting the attack occurred inside the car. The medical examiner concluded that she died from the wounds inflicted during the assault. Law enforcement immediately treated the case as a homicide. Detectives from the Cedar Rapids Police Department began interviewing friends, classmates, mall employees, and others who had seen Martinko on the evening of December 19th. Early in the investigation, police considered several individuals, including an ex-boyfriend and acquaintances, as possible suspects. Those leads, however, did not lead to evidence tying any of them to the crime. By the mid-1980s, the active investigation had largely stalled, and the case grew cold. In the years that followed, the murder of Michelle Martinko remained one of Cedar Rapids' most discussed unsolved cases. Law enforcement continued to receive tips periodically, but without forensic evidence that could be tied to a specific individual, the case lingered without resolution for decades. During this time, Martinko's family continued to seek answers. Both of her parents died without knowing who had killed their daughter. Her father passed away in 1995, and her mother died in 1998. A key development in the case occurred in 2006 when a cold case investigator with the Cedar Rapids Police Department reviewed the archived evidence and identified previously under-examined blood samples. The scrapings had been taken from the car's gear shift and from Martinko's clothing during the original investigation, but had not been fully analyzed. The investigator determined the blood belonged to a male, and forensic scientists developed a partial DNA profile from the sample. That profile was entered into the FBI's National Combined DNA Index System, CODIS. The profile, however, did not match any known offenders in the database at that time. Over the subsequent years, more than 80 potential suspects were identified, and more than 60 individuals were tested and excluded as possible matches to the DNA. The ex-boyfriend and other persons of interest were eliminated through alibis or DNA testing. The case remained unsolved even after more advanced forensic testing and investigation. In the mid-2010s, law enforcement turned to emerging genetic genealogy technology in hopes of generating new leads. A Virginia-based company used the DNA profile from the crime scene to predict physical characteristics and ancestral information about the unknown suspect. Investigators released composite images to the public based on this analysis. These images were not specific photographs of a person, but instead were reconstructions based solely on DNA data. Although hundreds of tips came in after the release of these images, none immediately identified the killer. In 2017 and 2018, investigators used genetic genealogy techniques by uploading the unidentified DNA profile to public ancestry databases. Through this process, they located distant relatives of the suspect who had voluntarily submitted their genetic information. By analyzing shared DNA segments, detectives narrowed the potential suspect pool to 3 brothers living in Iowa. On October 29, 2018, Cedar Rapids police covertly collected DNA from a discarded soda straw used by one of the brothers, Jerry Lynn Burns, who was living in Manchester, Iowa. When this covertly collected sample was compared to the DNA obtained from the crime scene blood, it was an exact match. The DNA matched the male profile developed from the blood found on Martinko's clothing and the car's gear shift. Police applied for and executed a search warrant to obtain Burns's DNA officially, confirming the match. On December 19, 2018, exactly 39 years to the day after Martinko's murder, Burns was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. At the time of his arrest, Burns denied knowing Martinko and denied committing the crime. He maintained he had never met her and could not explain why his DNA was found at the scene. Burns pled not guilty, and his case proceeded to trial. The prosecution presented evidence including the DNA match, the timeline of Martinko's last known movements, the absence of other forensic links to anyone else, and testimony from law enforcement about the genealogy process that led investigators to Burns.
The defense contested aspects of the evidence, including the method of obtaining Burns's DNA, but the jury ultimately found him guilty of first-degree murder on February 24, 2020. Under Iowa law, a conviction for first-degree murder carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. On August 8, 2020, Jerry Lynn Burns was formally sentenced to life in prison without parole. Following his conviction, Burns filed appeals challenging aspects of the investigation, particularly the manner in which his DNA was collected. In March 2023, the Iowa Supreme Court denied his appeal and upheld the conviction, confirming the lower court's ruling and the sentence imposed. Burns is imprisoned at the Anamosa State Penitentiary in Iowa. The investigation into Martinko's murder spanned nearly 40 decades, evolving through changes in forensic science and investigative methods. Early limitations in forensic science and the absence of a DNA database that included unknown individuals meant that the crucial evidence from the scene remained unlinked to a suspect for many years. Advances in DNA technology, particularly in genetic genealogy, ultimately provided the breakthrough that led to Burns's identification, arrest, prosecution, and conviction. Despite the long period during which the case remained unsolved, the preserved DNA evidence played a central role in achieving a resolution. The sample developed from Martinko's clothing and car not only established the presence of a male at the crime scene, but ultimately tied that evidence directly to Burns through modern forensic methods. The conviction brought legal closure to a case that had remained a source of unanswered questions for the Martinko family and the Cedar Rapids community. Michelle Martinko was 18 years old when she was killed. Her murder went unsolved for nearly 40 years, surviving changes in forensic science, investigative methods, and public interest. In the end, genetic genealogy provided the link between decades-old evidence and a suspect, resulting in a conviction that acknowledged both the limits of earlier investigation and the power of modern forensic technology to resolve long-standing cold cases.